Jai Hind, welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. Chinese influence, as the world thinks, is far and wide, and their fingers are all around the world. What if we said that their influence is now waning? To discuss this, I have with me Lieutenant General Ravi Shankar, a China watcher, if I may say so. Sir, thank you so much for joining me. I know you're not in your home base, and I'm still kind of pulling you into this entire thing, but I think the China watch needs to continue.
Yeah, China watch needs to continue. There's a lot of watching to do in China, right? And a lot of things are happening around China, I think, which we need to focus on. And well, the China we know now is not the China we knew 2 years back. Or the China which we discussed in the 2 years in between during the COVID time. As we enter the post-COVID era, as the COVID will taper off eventually, we have to contend with the new China and we need to watch it closely. So let's start.
Sure, sir. And I'd like to give everybody a heads up. We're also looking at a deeper analysis of the Chinese economy, although we've done that before. But as the general said, a lot of things have changed in China in the past 6-7 months that have been quite a surprise to even avid China watchers. So, we'll do that as part 2 of this particular thing. But let's start with Africa, sir. The Africa footprint was feared. The base in Djibouti, there's another base coming on the other side. But we are here trying to say that the African influence, especially in countries like Angola, for that matter, is kind of wailing down. What do you have to kind of analyze to that, sir?
See, before we touch on just Africa, we have to understand why China's influence is waning. The Chinese influence is based on a financial model, debt, lending, infrastructure building, etc., which led to a debt trap. The infrastructure not always been of that great quality. At the end of the day, many countries are feeling the pinch of this debt trap, and they feel some of the infrastructure which has come has no use. Like they built a highway in Montenegro, which is termed as a road to nowhere. Okay, so now when you view this against the US model, the US model was based on the US aid, help people, food, disaster relief, and things like that. So that was a little more attractive model than the debt trapping model which China has used. Africa is a big bet for China. Africa is a big bet for China because of the minerals it has, of the food security it gives to China. China has virtually contracted large tracts of land for food out there. And all this started with Angola. It is famously known as the Angola model. The Angola model was the beacon for the rest of Africa. As you know, Angola in the previous century, the last quarter of the previous century, had gone through a debilitating, civil war. UN was deployed there. Even many of our Indians had gone there as peacekeepers. When that whole thing finished, it was a wreck, physical wreck. Now, at that time, to the credit of China, China came forward with a lot of funds and infrastructure programs, and all. It took off. And for many of us who were watching China at that time itself, we had the thing that, look, this is an unnatural program. The whole thing was based on oil for value. So it was an oil-bagged loans. Everything was against oil. And China wanted energy. It was a convenient swap, oil on one side with Angola, which is an oil-rich country. And the Chinese had the expertise for infrastructure and everything, and it was all fine. The whole thing went for a toss because when the oil fell, the value of the oil fell, the loans became unpayable. And the Angolan economy for about 10 years was consistently growing, 10 to 12 years, about double-digit growth, 10 to 12% growth. But from 2016 onwards, the Angolan economy has contracted. Uh, the new ruler who has come in, the new president, he said, "No, I'm not interested in this." He says, "I need a different model. We need to diversify." Okay, it's a matter of life and death for them. That's what he has said. Now, the issue is that, at the heyday of Chinese infrastructure boom in Angola, there were nearly 300,000 Chinese in Angola. Today, there are hardly 20,000 left. All the projects are closed. So that model has collapsed, and that has sent is like a beacon to the rest of Africa. It's going to have it's going to have a rebound, and how this rebound will happen is to be seen. Right. At the same time, I must say that in Uganda they've uh, discovered huge deposits of gold,
Gold.
which is being mined by the Chinese. How the Ugandans will deal with the Chinese in the backdrop of Angolan experience and with other countries will tell us where China is going. But overall, its influence is a little shaky. So this much for Africa. So we could switch to another continent if you want.
Oh, absolutely. Let's go to the economically strongest continent, sir, which was basically lighting the fire for lighting the candles, if I may, for China's arrival into the EU. There was a time when President Macron is being quoted to say that, I have to trade with China. I have no borders, so I have no concerns with the security. Today, the story is flipped.
Yep, absolutely flipped. Why Macron said that long back, 2 years back? Just last year, there was a free trade agreement almost signed between EU and China, right? That was when the previous Angela Merkel was the head of Germany, and she almost was dictating what EU was to do. That for some reason it got delayed because EU had a difference of opinion within. It did not get ratified, though the Chinese were after the EU. After this Ukrainian war, then the last discussion between EU and China, has been described as the dialogue between the deaf. One side was speaking, the other side was not refusing to listen. So they had totally divergent views. EU has now said that China is a systemic rival. But that's important. We have to understand from 1972 onwards, ever since the US President Nixon went to China and started reviving the Chinese economy through offshoring and all that. Till now, till about a couple of years back, just that. The Chinese economy was an aided economy. Everyone wanted China to succeed. Today, it's the opposite. It's an opposed economy, right? There, everyone is opposing the Chinese economy. So the EU signifies this switch completely when they say they're systemic rivals, right? Now, look, these are pure economic deals and trade deals and all that. Let's look at the geopolitical influence. If you remember last year, the Americans left Angola, not Angola, Afghanistan in a hurry. Everyone thought that the Chinese will step in. Or there are a lot of Pakistan will enable China to get into Afghanistan. They had tremendous good relations were shown between Taliban and China, right? Photo ops and all that. Everyone said they're going to be copper mines dug up and all that. It all turned a pie in the sky. Today, China says no, we cannot do everything for Afghanistan. And China cannot handle Afghanistan. They perceive a security threat if they go in there. They still continue to perceive a threat from ETIM, East Turkestan Independence Movement, to Xinjiang. They're worried of extending CPEC into Afghanistan. By Afghanistan, they're worried of continuing CPEC in Pakistan with the kind of deaths which are taking place. So, this great thing which was they built, China's influence, and China will take over as the replacement superpower of USA. All that has come to a naught. It might not have come to a knot, but it's definitely not taking off. So there is a problem. Okay. And which other example you?
So I want to talk about, Wang Yi before the took a trip towards the Pacific, and it was supposed to be a combined security effort and stuff like that, and that thing failed. And we now know that the Vice President of USA, Kamala Harris, is in Fiji right now, trying to build up those relations and trying to kind of push out the Chinese influence. And there was an update that came this morning which spoke about two Chinese military attaches, of course, doing certain uh, spying activities, were actually thrown out of Fiji during the time when Kamala Harris actually came in. So there seems to be a lot of focus on to security within that region, especially coming in from the West against
See,
China.
the point is that China made a foray into Solomon Islands. Okay, when it went in, right? But then there was a throwback from the other Pacific Island nations. To the extent China and New Zealand started getting worried. Okay, and many things more happened. The Chinese approach into the Pacific Island group has been resisted by New Zealand and Australia also, quite heavily. And to the extent that Jacinda Ardern, who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand, and mind you, she's a pretty left-leaning lady, she herself has said that the Chinese assertiveness has to be addressed. Right? For her to say, she's always maintained good equations with China. To say this means something. So that means, people have started resisting China, right? If they have resisted China, their influence is waning. I mean, that's the corollary to the whole story.
Indeed, sir. As a matter of fact, New Zealand, I think first time they participated in a military exercise as well with this thing.
They participated in a NATO meet.
Yeah.
First time they've gone and addressed a NATO meet. This lady, all this she spoke when she was in NATO.
Yeah.
So
it's an interesting bit of a scenario. So let's move on to the Southeast Asia, sir. There's a lot which happens there. Vietnam is on the brink as it is. There's India-Vietnam relations are developing. Philippines, there's a new leader and there's some sort of a pushback. How do you analyze the immediate Southeast Asian neighborhood and Chinese influence within that region, considering the change of leaderships happening all across, actually?
See, let's start from the top. Let's look at South Korea. South Korea has gone totally against China in the recent past. Okay. And there the gap is widening. Mind you, South Korea and China have had good economic relations. That seems to be under some stress also. And South Korea wants to nuclearize. That's what the youth want. Youth feel that China is the long-term threat. Japan, when the Prime Minister Abe was assassinated, China was rejoicing. A lot of people
celebrating.
You can imagine the kind of effect which is, the relations between the two, and the relations are quite fragile at this point of time over the Senkakus. Come down to Philippines. Philippines, they've said their exploration and energy exploration thing and all is off. They said whatever China is doing transgresses our sovereignty, so it's off. Okay, though they are making some consolatory noises of cooperation with China and all that, but the fact is they bought BrahMos. They didn't buy a Chinese missile system. Okay, so that itself tells you something. Come to Malaysia. Vietnam, we all knew always that Vietnam is more pro-India, and it signifies clearly an anti-Chinese stance. Then you come down to Malaysia. Malaysia had a thing for in their jet fighter deal. They've opted for the Tejas and not for JF-17, despite getting good,
offers
from China. So that's also off. So there are a lot of issues here, if you see. On the other hand, forget India. India has also made inroads in that area. You also find that USA has made some better inroads into that area. Okay, and today I saw read that the Taiwanese are carrying out anti-PLA drills. Okay, so even in its immediate vicinity, okay, its influence, the positive influence is not there. It has an influence,
Hmm.
but the influence is negative, right? It is not able to get people to do what it wants them to do. That area where this is my territory, this is my backyard, everyone listens to me, that isn't happening. That's the point. And this is for the first time in the past 20 years that this is happening, that people are saying enough about China. Right. And of course, I don't have to tell you about Sri Lanka. That's a mess. Okay. And let me tell you, I don't think the Chinese will be allowed to get back there. The Rajpaksas were actually the front faces of Chinese in the population. Okay. And they feel that Sri Lanka has sold itself out to China.
Yeah.
That's their feeling. Right. So there the thing is bad. I also get the feeling that Chinese influence in Pakistan is winning. It's in two levels. The government and the military will speak one language. The people will speak another language. Even in the military, when the current chief about 6 months back, he said, "I have to go and buy equipment from this thing." It is indicative
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
more equipment being given by China, and hence the military influence is winning. And this military business is not restricted to Pakistan alone. It is also with Myanmar, it is also with Bangladesh and more. So overall, when you see the sum total of influence, political, economic, military, diplomatic, we've considered a whole lot of all these cases are of different varieties of influence. You see that somewhere or other, China has been put against the wall, right? It's not going to be easy. On the other hand, you see that American influence has increased, the Indian influence has increased, the Japanese influence has increased. I won't say the same about the Australian influence, but definitely Japanese influence has increased, the Indian influence has increased, and America has been able to stabilize its influence in that area, if not increased. So this is the sum total of what's happening there.
Sir, I want to talk about India and America specifically, because India, one thing we see is now, the trade, of course, is there, and there are various explanations given about the trade. We don't have options. It takes time. I'm just going to keep all that aside because, it's difficult to sit and discuss trade because it's such a wide subject. I want to talk about the Chinese influence within Indian markets, which is kind of slowly being weeded out economically, and we see the same sort of activities being done in the US as well with regards to small supplies, supply chains, and stuff like that. How do you see this entire thing, especially both of these big giants coming together and kind of pushing back on Chinese products?
See, there is a concerted effort which is on. There is some exchange of notes. The modus operandi of the Chinese firms is probably known now. And slowly, that undue influence on the market will start going.
Yeah.
Slowly.
Hmm.
Of course, having said that, we have to be careful with what we think and speak. Because the bilateral trade between India and China, which at one point of time was decreasing, has gone up.
Yeah.
Is it gone up due to what reasons it has gone up is something which we don't know, right? But yeah, like that Vivo case where the directors have had to flee, they were doing tax evading and things like that. It tells us that unless we keep a eagle's eye on the Chinese activities here, especially the trade activities, they'll start undermining our laws. And once they start undermining laws, they'll buy our politicians and things like that. Who in any case, many of them Many of our politicians, don't talk the language of money more than loyalty to the nation and all that, right? So there is a issue there.
Last
We
question,
have
sir.
to.
Sorry, you have to?
Yeah. No. Please go ahead.
Sir, my last question, sir. A point of time in the graph where you see China story kind of saying, going down. I would say let's talk about 10, 12 years ago where China was China. I mean, it was China. Everyone respected China. No matter what India had its problems at the border and stuff like that, but we still respected China with regards to what it did with itself in terms of development. What is that point of time in the graph where the world said, no, enough?
Well, I think it's not one point of time, it's a broad band of time.
So,
Uh, when the COVID broke out, people were still with China. They said, look, there's a problem, we should all share it. That when China didn't put internal blocks on people moving out of Wuhan and allowed people to go out of China, that is when the trust in China got lost. If you define one moment, for me that was that. For me personally, that was that moment, and many at that time argued about it that way, right? It, and then the second point in that is when China boasted that it had won over the virus, when others were still struggling, other
second week.
economies. Right? It started showing off as if it's the best country in the world.
And joking, I think, yeah, fair enough.
And started this thing. That's the second point of time. The third point just occurred recently with their zero COVID business. And they said zero COVID is the best way to fight COVID. And despite their zero COVID and everything, Shanghai had to go on a lockdown, and Beijing had to go on a lockdown. So many other, it's a rolling lockdown in that country. Every time there must be at least 25% of China, my guess, because news doesn't come out. At least 20 to 25% of China is under perpetual lockdown, right? And that has put their economy off badly. I think if you say the third point of time when things started changing was when, for a reference mark, when Shanghai went into that extended lockdown, end of February. So these 3 points, if you add together, it makes a block in which China position really flipped from being, China is unstoppable, to the time that China is stopping itself, right? And people, and this is the time when the trust also flipped.
Yeah.
And the time it is taken for what we have said, influence waning now. This is the gestation period which has happened. And you also have to understand, in this period, they boasted about their vaccines, which have been useless. And, so many other things. Their vaccine diplomacy, their mask diplomacy, their wolf warrior, all that has undone Chinese influence all over the world.
It just made me smile. Masks. I remember the photographs coming out of Pakistan. Sorry, I didn't mean to distract you, but that one image came to my head, and that was not very, not something I could hide in my expression. So, absolutely, I think what you're saying is right, and the whole factor that the world turned away from China. I think, and I believe this personally about the point of time is the virus. I remember in early February when certain videos started coming out of China. I mean, one used to feel very sad watching those videos. Oh God, how is that country surviving and this and that? But then when the damn thing came to us and the video started coming out, one was like, this, it serves them right. So that was a change of thought process, I guess, which happened around the world. Sir, thank you so much. Analyzing China is always fun. And as I said, and I'm going to repeat myself, there's another one coming on the economy. Of course, the economy is the main game which is happening. There's a lot which is happening in China today. Money losses, forex, trade, wars, I mean, the effect of wars, strategic reserves, whole lot. And of course, let me not, miss Xi Jinping's re-election.
Yeah.
So we will cover all that in the next episode. Till then, sir, thank you so much and Jai Hind.
Thanks. Jai Hind.